ultralight Linux. It's developed by a dude in Australia named Barry Collar. And basically he started out building a Linux from scratch, file by file, with the idea that it's going to be really simple and it's going to be really fast. And what you use it for is restoring like older computers that are too slow for Windows, too slow for Ubuntu. So basically the old clunkers that people are throwing away, you can put Puppy Linux on it and it will work again, probably faster than your regular PC. So I bought a netbook and I tried all the standard Linux distributions and they were all slow and too complicated. And then I discovered Puppy when I was trying to fix an older computer. I'm like, well, this would be really great on netbooks. So, but I loaded it up on my netbook, but there was a few things that I didn't like about it. Mainly, the kernel was a little bit too old for newer hardware because it's designed for old stuff, so it doesn't have the drivers you need and all the features you want. And some of the applications weren't so good. So I started building my own Linux distribution based on Puppy. I called it Puppy with 3 E's because my netbook that I bought was an EE PC. So, I guess this session is mainly just a show and tell, Q&A, what do you want to know? Like, what is it like to do your own Linux distribution, if you want to know that stuff. I don't know if I can fill up that much time showing off what I've done, we'll see. But, okay, so I built the kernel from scratch, started over, put just the device drivers I needed for my netbook, the EE PC. And I've got a few here actually because it ends up being cheaper and faster to just buy netbooks than to get the users to tell you what's wrong with your device drivers. So I have 4 EE PCs actually. I only brought 3 for this. The other one looks just like that. So let's see where it's at. Oh yeah. So the kernel is very slimmed down. It has only drivers needed for the EE PC, and then of course any sort of USB stuff you'd want to plug into it. So if you set it up right, you can boot it in about 10 seconds. But also some of the other cool things that you can do with it is that you can run it completely in RAM. The download size for the ISO is about 130 megabytes. But it's a pretty fully functional distro. We've got, the cool thing about Puppy is how many applications that come with it. And you can just take a look at the menu here. A lot of the ultralight distros are like, all you really ever need to do with your netbook is use a browser. Well, I'm a big nerd and I totally disagree with that. I want my netbook to be able to do everything. So, Puppy is the best distro for that because it has a bunch of developers who all know like all the really ultralight versions of software that you can load up on here and still fit it into a tiny ISO. So I guess there's probably about 150 different menu items. They're not all different applications. There's just a lot of configuration programs. And this comes with Chrome. It comes with Pigeon, Transmission, a bunch of different stuff that we add. So it's fairly full-featured, and you can load the entire thing into RAM so that you can remove the USB stick that you booted from and leave no trace at all. So that's kind of neat. I also play with window managers a little bit. This window manager here is IceWM, but I'm going to switch it to one that I like the best, and that's FLWM. If any of you use TinyCore, that's what they use, but my version is kind of hacked. The desktop environment here is called Rockfiler. It's kind of interesting. So you can see here FLWM has these cool panels on the side. I guess that didn't work very well because the screen's not the right size. We can probably fix kind of neat because you can use the full vertical, which whereas netbooks, have these short screens, so half the time when you're trying to use it, stuff's cut off on the top and bottom. The cool thing about FLWM is these side title bars, because then they don't take up your vertical space. Alright, so now I'm just rambling and I have no idea about where any of you are at, so does anyone have any questions or any sort of thing? Help me out here.
Have you tried it on HP?
I have a fork called Fluffy that has a full-size kernel. So that will run on most things. Now, I only actually know about all the drivers for EPC. So I'm working with the community for various, like they're like, oh, the hotkeys don't work on this netbook. That's still sort of alpha quality because I can't obviously buy every single brand of netbook and test it myself. So the more users I get, the better quality feedback I get, the better I can do.
What is your criteria in creating the small kernel? What was your primary focus to yourself?
Well, the first thing I did was I just removed everything. Mm-hmm. And then, well, I added some stuff I knew I needed, and then, through about 1,000 iterations, you eventually figure out what you actually need. So I'll make a lightweight kernel, then I'll post it on the internet, and then users are like, oh, my VPN doesn't work. Oh, okay, we need this driver for VPNs. Mm-hmm. So it actually took about a year to get it to the point where no one's really complaining anymore. Yeah.
You were talking about loading the whole thing into RAM.
Yes.
If you have especially some older netbooks or just an older laptop that has maybe half a gig of RAM.
Yep.
Does that still work pretty decently, or is it better to just install it?
It will. You can load it into 512. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you then try to install a bunch of stuff and open 25 tabs in Chrome, it will crash. Mm-hmm. But you can basically run it and do normal stuff. You might not be able to run OpenOffice, but you can run the software that comes with it completely. So it shouldn't be a problem. The only thing to be aware of is that you get no warning when you run out of RAM. It'll just... So you kind of have to keep an eye on it. There's a little, doodad that tells you where you're at with RAM. This little thing down here will turn red when you start to run out.
Can you install the distribution to get a little more RAM available? Or?
Yes, you can do, for Puppy Linux, there are several kinds of installations you can do. One of the neat things about it is it's designed to run on USB. So by default, when you install USB, it will store all your settings in one file called the save file. And for USB flash, you don't want to be constantly writing to flash because it wears out and it's slow. So it loads all the operating system stuff into RAM, and it caches all your changes in RAM, and then it writes them down every 30 minutes or so. You also have the option to do a full install, where it's just normal, regular Linux. All the files go on your disk the normal way. And that's the best way if you have limited RAM, but if you're running off an SSD, like these older ones, a lot of people are like, well, this is soldered to the motherboard, I can't replace it, and I don't want it to wear out. So you can still run in that mode off an SSD. So that's kind of neat. And then there's also the option to load your save file into RAM, where it's not using your disk at all. You can remove all your boot media, and when you shut it down, everything's gone. So, any more questions? Alright, one of the cool things I did was I rewrote LX Launcher. Okay. So, if any of you have ever played with this, it's LX Launcher, but normally, at least the version that I was able to download, is pretty antiquated and no one's worked on it in ages. So I rebuilt it. I put the tabs on the side more like Ubuntu Netbook Remix. So these are all my patches, and has a pretty, this is very lightweight, it's very fast, and it's customized to this distro. Let's see, what else can we show? Also have a version of PC Man FM if you don't like Rock's filer. Let's try this. So FLWM is really an old window manager too, and I've been working on it, trying to get it to be compliant with modern standards, but it's not really yet. Let's see if we want that. But we have both OpenBox and IceWM, and those are both very compliant. Alright, so this is your standard PC Man FM. It's the latest version, it's a little bit buggy. I think they're probably going to have that fixed up ready for their PC Man FM release part 2 pretty soon. But this is a beta, so I just throw it out there and see what people think of it. So really that's about all I've got. If you guys have any more questions, I really just like to talk about this. Otherwise, I'll let you go.
Have you tried any of the Acer laptops or notebooks?
It does work on Acers. Some people can run Puppy with the drivers that's included because a lot of them, they're the same hardware, it's just pre-branded. But sometimes certain drivers will be missing, which is why I have Floppy, which has all the drivers, it just doesn't boot as fast. So it should run just like this. Floppy doesn't have the EEE tools. I'll show you. So I wrote this in GTK Dialog, and this just has all the hardware tweaks that you can do with the kernel to turn off all the hardware. You can do the power saving stuff, overclock and underclocking, different power saving things. You can play with the fan, do panning or scaling for your screen. But the one for Fluffy is a little bit different because all these hardware things are different for each kind of network, so they'd have to be redone depending on what the kernel module will allow you to do. Any more questions?
Can you use a live version, like, booting it off against a USB or something?
Yeah, it's actually designed for USB booting.
Okay.
Everyone gets mad because I don't release ISOs except for final releases because I never use them. I don't have a CD drive to test them. So I distribute it in a zip file, copy it to your USB stick, and run the installer script. So it's really not even designed to run from the CD at all, but it's possible to do it. It's just, it can be a little buggy because I don't test it very much in that way. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on battery life and things to do to sort of make the battery last a little longer, or things that you notice really hit the battery performance?
Are you familiar with PowerTop?
No.
Let me show you. So this is a tool developed by Intel, and they figured out all these things you can do to reduce your battery or to increase your battery life. So the major thing is frequency scaling. Most modern Pentium support it, and what it means is that you can underclock your CPU when you're not using it. So most distributions do this for you automatically, but you gotta watch out for that because if it doesn't work, then your battery will last like an hour and you're done. So then it also tells you a few different things you can enable in the kernel. So I obviously do those for my kernels. And then the EEE PCs specifically allow you to underclock the front side bus, which saves a lot. On the main drives, usually the backlight. So I have it set up so you can, when it goes to power save mode, you can turn the backlight all the way down automatically so that you don't have to remember. Let's see, what else is a major? There's a few things. I did all the scripts myself, and I researched what Debian does and what PowerPop recommends, like turning the disks off when you're in power save mode, turning the Wi-Fi off, or into low power mode. So it really depends on your netbook for the, I don't know if other ones besides the EEE allow you to do this stuff with the front side bus, but that really makes the biggest difference. Any other questions? Yeah.
You see any uses for this in embedded types of hardware?
Yeah, actually Puppy has a lot of people that play with it on embedded systems. If you do a full install of the lightest Puppy, it'll run in less than 16 megs of RAM. So it's one of those distros that pretty much you can scale it however much you want. Just depends what you put. The main release of Puppy, this Puppy, not Pup E with 3 E's, is mine. That one, the ISO is about 120 megs, so it really won't run in anything less than 128, and even that's pushing it. But there's different ones. Like, the really cool thing about Puppy Linux is that it comes with remastering tools, and they're fairly easy. So there's like 100 different flavors at any given time that people are working on. It's a really interesting community. Because of the nature of the distro, it's very small, so obviously it doesn't meet everyone's needs, but you can build your own flavor, so everyone does. So, you know, there's Ubuntu Studio Lite, or there's a browser Linux, which all it has is a browser, and the download size is like 60 megabytes. And there's just like hundreds of different flavors, just what everyone wants, they just build their own. And then you post it, and people tell you if they like it or not. It's a really neat community. It's worth checking out if you have some spare time.